What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode. Today, I'm with John Vallis. He runs, did I pronounce that correctly, John?
Vallis.
Vallis. Okay, sorry. I live in Miami, so you have to say it the Hispanic way. Anyway, so I'm here with John Vallis. He runs the Bitcoin Rapid Fire podcast, it's a pretty big podcast. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. What's up, John? Welcome to the show.
Hey, brother. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
So, dude, any crazy pandemic stories you got?
Crazy pandemic stories. I mean, the whole thing is obviously absolutely insane. Personally, any type of chaos, I usually try to stay away from. So I've been very much as possible in the country. I'm actually I live in Thailand, usually. So I've got a place there, and I was home for Christmas, and I stayed for an extra couple months. And long story short, I got locked down here, and now Thailand is still closed off to tourists. So I've been stuck here in Newfoundland, is where I'm from originally. I've been stuck here for way longer than I intended to be. So I've just been taking the opportunity to, one, do stuff with the pod, but two, spend time with family and spend time in nature. I love just being out where there's not very many people, and exercising, going on hikes, just breathing in that sweet fresh air. So I try to stay away from the chaos. So no real crazy stories from my end.
Absolutely, man. And dude, that's so great. So at least you found some bright sides of this whole closure, right? So that's good. That's good that you get to reconnect with family like that, or you have an excuse to.
Yeah, man, totally. I lived in China for a decade, so I haven't been back for a summer since in over 10 years. So it's really nice to, and I always come back in the winter, and Newfoundland winters, there's always lots of snow and they're kind of harsh, so it's been nice to be back in the summer and actually be able to like swim in fresh water and pick blueberries and, do all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. It sounds super beautiful. Unfortunately, I'm a big city guy, so,
Where are you?
I feel like it's the opposite. Yeah. So I lived in Miami most of my life. I've lived some time. I've lived in New York as well. So just the complete opposite side of the spectrum, man.
Well, dude, I've been a big city guy. I lived in Shanghai, right? It's 28 million people, right? So I've always wanted that kind of hustle and bustle, and I enjoy it, and I still kind of enjoy it. But as I get older, and I guess as the kind of lifestyle that I truly desire becomes more clear to me, it's definitely like what I'm trying to strike is a balance, but I can see it going more toward the kind of solitude direction. I know this is very common, amongst Bitcoiners, and I think it's, partially due to we see the chaos that's going on in the world. We see what's coming. We probably don't want to be around for when it happens. We also, a lot of Bitcoiners that at least I've spoken to seem to have an appreciation for the natural world and nature, seem to have an appreciation for the kind of rejuvenating effects on the body of being out in nature and exercising and stuff. So, as much as the big city life is great for connecting with a lot of different people, and there's so much activity and there's so many things to do all the time, I'm definitely becoming more of like, all I want to do is like go for a hike in nature and I'm straight, get some exercise, hike in nature, hang out with some cool people, talk about Bitcoin a little bit, and I'm probably going to be happy.
Absolutely, man. So I always tell people, like you go to New York and Shanghai, I'm sure it's the same thing because it's such a metropolitan city. You go to New York, not really to live. You go there to survive. You go there to like make something of yourself, right?
Yeah.
Because that's always what I viewed like a city like New York City, right? Like you can't live there, like at least I can't, right? Like it's awesome to, I guess, be there like when I lived there in my early 20s, and it was exactly what you said. It was the hustle and bustle, everyone's trying to get something done. Everyone's on a mission, but it's such a contrast compared to, that calm down life. So I completely see what you're saying. So John, before we dive into Bitcoin, right? Because I feel like that's where we're going to spend the majority of this conversation. What's your background, man? Where do you come from? What's your story?
Well, I'll try to do the quick version because I've told it a bunch of times already, but the quick version is I come from Newfoundland, Canada. Beautiful, rugged island on the North Atlantic. Have been living abroad for most of my adult life. Right after university, I went to South America for 3-4 months. And actually the year before I graduated, I did the same. And that was actually to go and seek out and spend time with an ayahuasca shaman. You know, I was
Okay,
really
cool.
interested in, you know, I went down the rabbit hole of just trying to piece together how the world works. And at least, you know, one of the roads that opened up for me was kind of trying to understand what there was, like what more to life there was than kind of accumulating wealth and power. Because if you kind of study history, right, this is the course of history. You know, people consolidate wealth and power, whether they be kings or, you know, notable wealthy people through history. And I was kind of wondering, like, beyond a certain point, what motivates more of that behavior? And, you know, I also started to understand the world in terms of a lot of the things that were kind of fucked up about the world, you know, how financial system works, how the medical system works, how the political system works, yada, yada, yada. And it was, you know, it was kind of disheartening, of course. You know, I thought there's got to be more. And so many ancient cultures and civilizations, whether they be highly developed like your Greece or your Egypt, et cetera, or they be rather comparatively primitive like your, you know, Amazonian cultures or other kind of indigenous cultures, they had these practices. Some were like kind of sacred rites and they were more formal, and other were less formal, but nevertheless present in many of these cultures where, for lack of a better term, they had reliable methods of altering their consciousness. And, you know, various rituals around that, celebratory rituals, you know, more serious rituals. And I just want, like, so that was a big question mark for me. I was like, what's that about? You know, I'm kind of piecing together the political, economic, social world, but what's that nugget of what's going on over there? And so I read as much as I could on the subject, and then thought, you know, there was a lot of talk at the time, this was 2008, about, you know, what was happening. You know, ayahuasca was kind of becoming more popular. Many people had been writing about it. It was the kind of focal point of altering your consciousness. And down in Peru, it was legal, and there was a long heritage of this practice, you know, into prehistory. So anyways, I thought that was compelling enough for me to go and put boots on the ground and try to explore it a little bit more. And I thought, you know, the best way to do it would be to take, you know, a bunch of time and really spend time with the shaman and try to understand what all this was. Now, like, that sounds like a nice story, but I have to admit, the first time I went down, I sought it out. It wasn't really the experience I was looking for. You know, had a few what they call ceremonies and thought it was very interesting, but everything around it wasn't really that interesting to me or satisfying. And so I spent like the next 2-3 months backpacking throughout South America and just kind of partying, really, you know, just being, you know, a bit young and stupid. And then the next year after I finished university, I went back down, took a little bit more seriously this time. Still, you know, didn't think it was maybe what it's chalked up to be, but still very interesting. And, you know, pretty much formed the basis for a lifetime practice of appreciating the different methods and benefits of the intentional altering of consciousness. And so then I also traveled a little bit more on the back of that, bought a one-way ticket to Shanghai, looking for a job in finance, because that's, you know, when I was in high school, I'd always been interested in economics and finance. I also wanted to be rich, and I thought the best way to be rich is to, you know, deal in money, basically. And so I farted around Shanghai for a couple of weeks, met a guy. No one was putting out resumes everywhere. Nobody was interested. And then I met a guy at a UFC viewing at a bar. I'm a massive UFC and MMA fan. And the guy that I sat next to was recruiting for the largest wealth management firm in the city. So we hit it off, and he said, come in for an interview. And so I ended up getting the job there, worked there for 2-3 years, really, really, really hated it. You know, I had a kind of an idea that wealth management is like this very kind of serious business where you're really crafting, you know, people's financial futures, and, you know, it's taken very seriously. But the reality is it's a financial sales job, and it's all sell, sell, sell. And I didn't like that, so I left somewhat spontaneously. And then I actually, you know, the other big interest of my life has been health and wellness. And so I did a 3-year program in natural medicine. And then I went back to Shanghai and worked in a clinic there for 2 years. I didn't mind the work. Well, I liked that industry more, but the clinic that I worked with was a Chinese-owned clinic. And, not to generalize, but, Chinese, especially a certain generation, are very much focused on making money. Like, of course everybody is, but they're maybe sometimes too focused, and I just didn't like basically the sell pressure that was on me there either. So I left and traveled around for a bit, went to Thailand, and bought a motorhome in Europe, drove around Europe for 3 months in 2018, came back for Christmas, moved to Thailand, and here we are. Came back again, visit home for Christmas, and as with regards to Bitcoin, have been watching it for a very long time. I think I got my first few sats. Can't remember if it was 2014 or 15. It was on a trip to Bali, and been enthralled by it ever since.
So man, that's a very interesting story. You got a ton of topics there. You got psychedelics, you got finance, you got living in another country. Man, and I just want to touch up on that aspect of living in another country. And I feel like it really gives you a deeper insight into the world, especially a country where its culture is absolutely foreign to Western culture, right? So like my experience is I've lived a couple months in South America and in the Caribbean. I'm Venezuelan myself, so I guess it isn't foreign, but to an American, it is quite foreign. So, and it kind of expands your mind because you understand that there's these people that live in a geographically different location than you, that think completely differently than you do, right? So, like for me at least, right, it made me appreciate the world in a different light, right? So, I don't know if you had that same experience. I don't know. What was your experience living in another country?
Well, I mean, I was fortunate as a kid to have, my family lived in France for a year when I was 5. And I traveled like to a couple of countries in my youth. So I kind of like pierced that veil early, but no, it's always insightful, or it always impacts your perspective to spend time in places that are very different from the bubble of where you come from. And, whether that's a crazy, city like Shanghai in China, or whether that's a place like a small village in the Amazon. I mean, there's things that are similar across the board in all places. And then there's obviously a lot of cultural differences between these places. But, the thing that comes to mind when you ask me that question, the one thing that I always like, China when I first arrived, and it changes rapidly. So now there's much less of this, but it was just such a weird place. Like, you have this rampant economic growth, and the cities are modern and sparkling and high rises and lights everywhere. But the kind of mindset, like the look and feel of the city, or the country, but especially in Shanghai, was seemed like it was ahead of the cultural perspective of the people, right? And this is kind of a nice way of saying, like, the people were still very like in a kind of old mindset. And there's just a lot of quirky, weird things that happen when you've got so many people. And then, you got to appreciate the history that they come from. Like the 20th century was rough for the Chinese people. And, when I went there for the first time in 2009, like, they had only come out of abject poverty. And still, even in 2009, there was a lot of it. But let's say, like, they'd been really moving forward, from the mid 90s onward. So it hadn't even been 20 years, so like like absolute abject poverty was still very fresh in the memory of most of the people like alive when I went there, or at least their parents. And so there's lots of weird, crazy stuff, like as this new culture is kind of figuring out what their identity is and how to be. And then overlaid on that, you've got, a government apparatus that is very intent on promoting a certain form of kind of an image of the nation and a national pride and the propaganda that accompanies that. So you've got, in terms of their consciousness, okay, opportunity and wealth and novelty in terms of the complexity of the economy, that's kind of blowing their minds as they move forward in time. And then you've got this, really intentional effort by the government to cultivate a certain national perspective and mindset. And so it made for like a very unique point in history. And I think it'll be reflected on as such. And it's, for better or for worse, it seems to be diminishing now. But the point in telling you this is, I would always come, because the younger people, like, the people that I met that were 20, 25, 30, 35 years old, they weren't like that. They were sharp, they were ambitious, they were educated, usually abroad. If you're relatively wealthy, well, there's a lot of wealth in China. And if you're wealthy, you get educated in Canada, the US, the UK, Australia, typically. And you go to the best schools. And so they were educated, they were worldly, they traveled, they had money, they were ambitious, and they weren't seemingly very susceptible to like all the propaganda that they had been exposed to growing up. And so I sensed from them like a genuine clarity. Like they were very curious, their eyes were wide open. And when we'd interact with them, everyone is focused on improving their life, and like kind of everyone's very ambitious. If we come and I come home, and even, of course, there's some people that are ambitious, but the general malaise of the society, like people are just kind of happy with the way things are, and they're going about their business, and there's not that much drive, and there's not that much motivation or ambition. There's not that much curiosity for what else is going on in the world and how it all works. But from the younger generation in China, that's the complete opposite. They were just on fire. And so, yeah, it was always interesting to see that difference. And I ultimately came to feel like when I came home, there was almost more of a culture shock when I returned home than when I would, be living there.
Man, that's crazy. And, I feel like I think that you really hit the nail on the head when you're speaking about, the younger generation, Chinese mainlander versus like the boomer, so to speak. And I think that you really, I think that you're completely right in that aspect, where that great wealth divide, and in terms of the generational divide and the preparedness, is just so different. And I completely agree with you. I was lucky enough to spend, I would say, like 6 or 7 months in China around the same era, around the same time, so 2008,
Oh, really?
2009. But I was young, man. I was very young. But it was a time in China where there was a lot of hope, right?
Yeah.
And that's changed recently, for a variety of factors. But
What were you doing there?
Man, so my dad was doing business there at the time. So he decided just to take the whole family, bro. And
Wow.
we
What
spent
part were you
6
in?
months in Shanghai, in
Sick.
this hotel. And then, and basically, like, it was near the Bend. And we would travel and we would spend some time in Shenzhen, and my dad would like make contacts there. But I really got to know, like, of course I was young at the same time, but I really
How
got
old
to,
were you?
I was around like 18, 17, 18.
Okay, so you could have some fun.
Yeah, but I was mostly with family. It was, like I didn't venture. I didn't venture out and do some crazy things, but it was definitely a hell of an experience. And I definitely know what you mean when you were referencing those things. So I wanted to ask you something, man. And this is kind of like, I'm kind of pivoting a little bit, just because I kind of want to get into Bitcoin a little bit. So you said that you spend about 2 or 3 years in finance, and you said that your experiences with psychedelics kind of made you focus on health. Is that correct when I say that?
No, I'd always like.
It always interested you, and then I
I
guess.
was I was a
Yeah.
fat kid, and
Okay.
then I made a bet with my dad, for a stupid camping lighter when I was like 14. It's like one of those windproof, waterproof things. Anyways, I said I won't eat any cookies or candy for a month if you get me this lighter. It was $50, which is, it was a lot of money when you're 15 or 14 or however old I was. Anyways, he agreed to it, and I lost a bunch of weight, and I thought, wow, this is kind of cool. And since then, I just kind of really been into it. But I think the psychedelic piece for me comes from like a pretty ferocious, unquenchable curiosity that I've always had.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I just inevitably wound up there, because if you ask enough questions, that's You know, the Bitcoin rabbit hole is so deep and so fascinating. And to those of us who are in it, it's kind of like crazy that other people don't see how rich and deep it is. Psychedelics is very similar to that, just in what it is. Like we don't even know what that is, but when people have the experience, you know, it's a very, very powerful experience for them. So I think a curious mind will ultimately end up there. But you know, there's certainly a lot of overlap between managing one's health, in particular their mental health, and psychedelics, and that industry is just getting going now, and I'm really excited to see how it develops.
So did you have total ego loss when you tried ayahuasca?
Well, I mean, simply put, yes, but I think ego death is it, you can have a psychedelic, in my opinion, you can have a psychedelic experience without ego death, but not like the psychedelic experience isn't the same for everybody. It's not even the same every time the same individual has it. And so for me, the ego death, it puts you in a perspective where you can see all the different elements of your identity. And in particular, you can see what is somewhat, you know, what is a delusion of some way, what is kind of a construction of your identity. And it shows you what maybe lies behind that as your kind of core essence or spirit or whatever you want to call it, your awareness, the spark of life. And that can be a very unsettling feeling when you see that for the first time, when you're kind of when the observer is separated from the thinker. You know, that can be very challenging and uncomfortable. If you resist that, then I think you can get, you know, you'll have a really hard time, but you may not really feel that quote unquote ego death. In my perspective, the more, like, this whole experience, the more you let go, the more you get out of it. So despite how fearful it might be, you've got to just keep letting go and letting go and letting go until there's nothing left almost but pure awareness. And so if you do that, then yes, you know, that I would term that ego death, because your ego is kind of all the different points of your identity and all the different associations that you use to kind of have a self-referential idea of who and what you are. And once all of those dissolve away, then the question is posed to you, well, what's left? What is observing, you know? And I think that's ego death, but I think it can be very, 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 very uncomfortable. And so that's why, you know, I always kind of say, you know, the more you can let go, the better. And the ultimate letting go is letting go of the fear of death. And so that's why, even as experienced as I am, in, you know, with these experiences, I'm always very nervous before I go into them, because, you know, I know that to get the most out of them, I have to, and I know I'm not taking something that should physiologically kill me, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, let's say psilocybin is not a toxic substance to humans, but you can feel like you may die in the experience, whether you're just tripping yourself out or whether it's you know, your heart feels like it's going to explode or your breathing is messed up or whatever. And I genuinely, when I go into the experience, I kind of accept that tonight might be the last night. And I got to be okay with that if I'm going to get the most out of the experience. And that's a trip in itself, you know, because fear of death is, you know, pretty much that's the big one, right?
That's the
And
big one.
if you can gain I don't know, maybe a healthier frame of reference on a fear of death, then that's a pretty empowering thing.
I think that if you try your best to make peace with that, it's a very liberating feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it really, like, and I'm going to kind of reference, like, you know, they've interviewed soldiers, right? And basically, you know, it's like, you know, how do you get the job done? They basically say, like, listen, you have to imagine yourself like you're already dead, right? And if you picture yourself like you're already dead, it allows you to focus on the job, right? So why am I saying that, right? Because it's basically repeating what it is you're saying, right? The more you let go, the more you let go of this self-constructed concept of ego, the more you'll be able to observe in a non-biased way, right? So I completely agree with that, man. I haven't done something like ayahuasca, but I've messed around with psychedelics for sure. Ayahuasca tends to be one of the heavier ones.
Yeah.
Maybe in my future, I'll give that a shot. Definitely the way that you're describing, it's definitely
Well,
like jumping off a plane. You got to do it once, right?
well, yes, but just for context, after those because first of all, the jungle is a very oppressive environment, right? It's really uncomfortable. There's bugs, the humidity, the heat, all that kind of stuff. And ayahuasca is a bit of an ordeal, right? Because you're vomiting and you have, you know, bowel movements, and these happen intermittently throughout the experience, and nobody likes diarrhea and puking, right? So subsequent to that, I find that psilocybin is the absolute best substance for these explorations, because it doesn't have those kind of violent physiological effects. It's non-toxic physiologically. It's been very well studied. You know, with ayahuasca, you're mixing in a bunch of different, you know, jungle plants, and every shaman has a different mix. You don't know what really the fuck you're getting. Whereas, you know, psilocybin is psilocybin, and it's been, you know, there's a lot of experience with that. And I just think it's the cleanest way to access. I think all these things more or less bring you to the same place. Like in
I think so.
ayahuasca,
Really. So
feeling,
so you take mushrooms and it's the same as taking ayahuasca. It's not on a different level, because I always see it as different levels, man, and levels
like
of intensity.
so ayahuasca is DMT, right? That's the active psychoactive ingredient in ayahuasca, and it's combined with a what's called a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, so that it can be orally active. And then, of course, you have smoked crystal DMT as well. And then you have, you know, 5-MeO DMT from the Sonoran desert toad. You know, you can milk the glands and dry it, and that's a very, very intense experience. But yeah, I think that there might be some subtle differences in kind of the landscapes that you might encounter kind of on your way to the apex of the experience. But I do think that the apex of all of these experiences is the same. And it's like you just discussed, it's kind of like that I know this sounds both cliche and overly simplistic, and anyone listening has to appreciate that this is an ineffable thing. You just cannot describe it with words. Words aren't sufficient to describe it. But at its core, I feel like the apex of the experience is just being completely unified with the present moment, being absolutely at peace with the present moment. So not being pulled away from it via thoughts, via sensations. And I know that sounds like almost so simple it's not even interesting, but you know, that's definitely not the case. But yes, I think they all bring you to the same place. And I just want to make an important distinction is, you know, obviously we had the 60s with psychedelics, and my only exposure to psychedelics before I started taking it seriously was, you know, getting a bunch with my guy friends, you know, chewing on a few mushrooms and like playing video games or listening to music or going out and being silly. And, you know, whatever, that to each their own. But I always want to like to make a clear distinction. Like there's taking a small dose for recreational purposes, and then there's the very intentional approach where you take an extremely high dose in an extremely controlled setting with 2 other people. Maybe you have a sitter, maybe you have a partner that you're doing it with, out in nature or in silent darkness. And you know what you're doing, you know why you're there, and you're going for it. You're not messing around. So because a lot of people hear this conversation and they say, well, I've done psychedelics, you know, I was at a rave one time, or I was at a music festival, and typically they're not in the same universe of experience. So
Absolutely, because one is definitely recreational, exactly what you said, and one is definitely spiritual, and they're very different experiences.
Exactly.
And from the spiritual aspect, I think that your connection with the world, because what you said, it's exactly right. You could really only understand it if you've been there, right? Because you describe it's like, you know, getting unattached with, you know, your thoughts of the future, your thoughts of the past. But I don't think people realize how much weight you take off your shoulders, and how important and how crazy of an experience is really living in the present moment, right? Because the majority of your life is you're thinking about the future, you're planning ahead, or you're dwelling right on the past, right? That's the majority of people's lives, right? You know, you're working every day, you're like, what am I working towards? There's a goal, there's a thing. But absolutely, man, you could definitely have that connectivity with the present moment, and I feel like that's so important to have at least once in your life.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's a shame that it's been suppressed and kind of slandered and a lot of misinformation for, for the last, 60, 70 years. But what's encouraging now is that the science is catching up, which is legitimizing the practice, which is making it easier from a policy framework, which is bringing it to a more kind of an audience that's less risk averse. And I think it's starting to change. And I think in our lifetimes, we're going to see these substances used as they should be, in both a ceremonial and intentional way, and a way to, for ultimately make for healthier people, on earth, whether they be in a society or as individuals. I just think it'll be a tool used to kind of increase the well-being of people.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you, John. And John, I kind of want to pivot a little bit. I want to talk to you about your podcast, man, which is one of the reasons that, I wanted to have you on my podcast, and I'm glad that you agreed, which is the Bitcoin Rapid Fire. Man, when did you start this? Was this your first one? And I'm going to add to that. I'm going to add a little kicker. Do you feel like your experiences in life give you a different outlook compared to the podcasts that you have seen? Because you seem like a very deep person, right? You seem like you're a very conscientious person. Do you feel like your unique circumstances, your unique experiences living in China, spending time in South America, coming from a remote area in Canada, do you feel like that, and also working in traditional finance as well, right? That's a weird mix. I didn't think I was going to hear that. Do you feel like those experiences have given you a unique outlook on your podcast?
Well, first, I don't consider myself like a deep thinker or anything. And, I've heard that from a couple people, and, I never know really what to think about it. Because I guess we have a hard time perceiving what we're like, because we're not observing ourselves all the time. A couple things there. One, well, I'll start with the more interesting stuff. I think, of course, we're all a result of our experiences, right? And so, sure, I've been shaped by my experiences just as much as you have, and every other person. And, what I've come to appreciate, and I guess I've been more of a seeker than most, right? Because I was always the guy, trying to get my friends to come on like whether it was South America or backpacking somewhere, like I always wanted my friends, like, come on guys, it's way more interesting than, going down to the bars every night or every weekend and just getting wasted and going back to our boring jobs. Like, let's go and let's explore, let's learn, all that kind of stuff. And, there wasn't many takers. So I can appreciate that. I guess, for whatever reason, I had a bit more of a curious mind for that type of stuff, at least. And that's formed the basis of the experiences I've had. But what you come to realize when you start doing this type of stuff, like podcasting or sharing your perspective in any way, writing articles, books, creating content of any kind, is that what you're really offering is your perspective. Like that's the thing that people are interested in. Now, I'll caveat this by saying, I don't care if anybody ever listens to my show. I do this because I really like having these conversations, and to be able to, in my opinion, Bitcoin is a civilizational transformational thing, and we're here at the very beginning of it. And having an appreciation for history and being a big history buff myself, if you zoom out on this, we're at this exceptionally special moment in time. And I want to soak it up and take advantage of it as much as possible. And for me, that's connecting with all the other people who are involved in this, builders, thinkers, writers. Like, I want to connect with these people because this is such a special moment in time. It'll be talked about for millennia to come, in my opinion. So that's why I do it. The fact that people tune in and listen is awesome. It's a privilege. And, to the only reason I care about it really is because, especially earlier on, if you have an audience, then the quote unquote bigger names are more, receptive to being guests because there's maybe greater benefit to them, or it's worth their time more, or whatever. But yeah, back to the other point is, that's all we're doing. You formed your perspective throughout the experiences that you've had in your life. And I think the best thing we can do is just express that genuinely through the content that we make, and let the chips fall where they may. And, you know, maybe some people, their perspective is very common or it's not that interesting. And, you know, maybe they don't develop a big following, but if they enjoy it, who gives a fuck? But maybe they do, you know? And so I think that's been the case for me. It's like, people come for the guests and the conversations and what they can learn, for sure. But like, we're all social animals, and we're really interested in, like, who are these people and what are they like and what do they do and how do they think and why do they have that opinion? And so what I just try to do is just be true to my perspective, you know. And occasionally you can get away from that. Like, you know, very simple examples, like maybe you have a quote unquote big name and you get a bit nervous and you think, well, what should I talk about on this show? And that always ends up being my worst stuff, because I'm less there, you know, back to the psychedelic point. I'm not as present when that happens, because I'm thinking about what I should be, not thinking about what I am, or not expressing what I am. And so, so yeah, I think that's the game, is cultivating your perspective and then expressing it genuinely. And beyond that, you know, I don't think you can, beyond that, you got to kind of just let things happen as they might. But, and then to your question about, have I done it before? I started the podcast in August of last year, and I wasn't familiar with Bitcoin Twitter up until early last year, but I've been into Bitcoin for, you know, 5-6 years. And so when I found Bitcoin Twitter, I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, these are my people. Like these are all the people that I've been wanting to connect with, and I didn't even know they existed. So I just got super jazzed off that. And then I decided, like, well, I've got a podcast about it. But it actually wasn't the first thing. When I was living in Shanghai in 2000, when I was transitioning actually after finance, there was a lot going on in the tech startup world in Shanghai, just so much interesting stuff. And I was drawn to it because, you know, I just like the attitude of figuring out solutions to problems, i.e. innovating and building companies, rather than complaining about the state of the world, you know, as is very often the case these days. And being in Shanghai, kind of one of the epicenters of tech in the world, and so much capital coming into it and so much talent, very similar feeling to Bitcoin, although relatively small compared to what's happening in Bitcoin now. I just wanted to talk to those interesting people. And so in my spare time, very sporadically, because I was working most of that time, I connected with people in the startup community there. And I had a podcast called the Tech in Shanghai podcast. And I just interviewed startup founders, again, as a hobby, you know, didn't do much with it. And obviously since leaving, you know, I haven't done any more of it for a number of years now. But that was my first, like, dipping my toes in the water of podcasting. And now with the Bitcoin one, it's, I just get to do it more, and I get to do it with all these awesome people, and I get to discuss something that I seem to have an endless enthusiasm for. So it's
absolutely. And I think you really hit the nail on the head. I think that if you want to do a podcast, I think that if you come in with this mentality of, I just want to make the biggest podcast and have all these people listening, you're going to fail right off the rip. Right.
Yeah.
Like, the reason that you want to do this, or the reason that I started, and it sounds like the same reason that you started, is because you genuinely want to hear the dopest stories from people that work in your fucking industry. Right. So
Yeah.
like, so, you know, and I tend to notice something, which is, at least in my experience, right? So what I've noticed, and I've interviewed some pretty big people, I've interviewed some pretty small people. What I've tend to notice is, when I say small, I mean people that don't focus on social media. They just don't care, right? Yep. They're not about Twitter. They just do whatever. But what I've tended to notice, John, is that those people tend to be really fucking interesting for two reasons, right? Number one is that they're not practiced, right? Because if you do this a lot, you know what to say, because you know it. You've done it before, right? So you in the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned, you're like, I'm going to tell the short story because I've told this story a bunch of times, right?
Yeah.
But what tends to happen if you interview someone for the first time, you're getting raw dog sincerity, right? Like, that person has never done this before. So the questions are going to catch them off guard, and you notice in their facial expressions that they're catching them off guard. So I don't know if you agree with that, but it's like
Oh,
the
dude,
blend, right?
100%. I mean, and again, like there's still lots of air quotes, big names in the Bitcoin space that, I know I'll speak to, and I'm looking forward to speaking to them. But two things. One, there's so many podcasts now, right? And a lot of the same people end up being on the podcast. And like, I want to exercise my own curiosity. If I've heard, and I'm going to use this example, not a slight on him at all, and I'm sure I'll speak to him, but Adam Back, right? Big name in the space. Everyone wants to speak to him. If I've heard like 5 podcasts with Adam, most of my natural questions are probably answered. Now, I'll still enjoy just kind of jamming out with Adam and maybe going in a different direction than other people have gone. But my point is like, I've heard that story as you were just saying, but I did something I've been doing a series called Bitcoiners in the Wild, right? Where I just, I'm sitting at home and I fire up a live, I DM on Twitter, I post on Twitter, whoever wants to jump on a live stream in 5 minutes, DM me. And then the first one that comes awesome. In, I jump on a live stream with, and I've been enjoying those more because, they're very novel. I don't know anything about this person. So all my curiosity and questions are very, very natural. And it's just been, I've done it with, 20 people or so now. And it's been so great to connect with Bitcoiners in the US, Canada, Australia, like all over the world, and hear their stories and hear why they're amped up about Bitcoin, and, get their thoughts on whatever they're into, economics, finance, culture, politics. Yeah, man. So that's been a great part of it. And, I'm sure I'll do more.
It's freaking awesome, man. Just talking to people with something that you have this natural, common ground with, right? And just,
well, that's the thing that brings it all together, right?
Absolutely.
Like the fact that I'm sure we understand it in slightly different ways, but most of us that are here, we pretty much get what we're dealing with here, and we appreciate it in similar ways. And so it's easy, just that brings us all together. That's the common thread. And then we just jam about, what it's been like engaging in this thing and how we've changed as a result of doing so, and what our, plans for the future are and what our concerns are. And it's great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this is a perfect segue for my next question. I hope I get to ambush you just a tad with this. So you're in the unique position of running a Bitcoin podcast, which means that you talk to a crap load of Bitcoiners, right? And I could say this as well. What would you say Bitcoiners have in common? And what would you say some Bitcoiners don't have in common?
Well, the first thing that came to my mind was hope for the thing that we have in common. And I think a lot of people were in the boat that I was probably in, earlier in my life, finishing university, 2008, 7, whatever. When I was in that period of kind of piecing together, trying to understand the world, it's like you get a fairly dark picture of how things work. Lots of bright spots, of course, and happiness and love and all that stuff. But, on a larger scale, lots of problems and lots of, seemingly insurmountable obstacles and problems. And Bitcoin, and understanding money, and understanding the implications of what Bitcoin represents, it's unavoidable that it gives you this, a boost, like an injection of hope for the future. Like, no, it can be different, and it can be better, and it can be fairer for everyone. It can be more prosperous. It can be more peaceful. It can be more cooperative. And that's awesome. And it's really, and that generates, and that's only one aspect of it, but it's a big one, and it generates so much enthusiasm. And so I think that's the common thread. Is like a lot of us were conscientious people, curious people, interested in a broad array of topics, and may have been kind of down or depressed or whatever, by looking out at the world and seeing what it really represented. And I think Bitcoin was just this big kind of, atom bomb of hope dropped on us. And that's probably why so many of us engage on it so much, both hope for our individual lives and kind of the life we want to construct for ourselves, and then hope for, the broader culture, society, humanity at large. As for things that are uncommon, you mean, so like like kind of point of contention? Some are yes, some are no, sort of thing.
No, I don't mean it like that. I mean, like, I asked you this question just from my own experiences, so perhaps you disagree. But there's a lot of common ground
Yeah.
between Bitcoiners, but at the same time, they're extremely different people, right?
Uh-huh.
So that's the kind of angle that I'm coming from.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I, 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 I think, well, like we were saying, everyone comes from different backgrounds. Like, look, yes, there's a lot of white dudes in Bitcoin. Like, fair enough. Like, but I think, people come from a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different areas of expertise, life experiences, demographics and that kind of stuff. And uh, the common thread, I think, just has to be curiosity. I mean, it's with the pace of people's lives and all the stresses they have and family and work and whatever, and the kind of the seeming either complexity or irrelevance of Bitcoin is easy to dismiss. It's either like, oh, I heard about that, another like stock market scam or whatever, I'm not into it, or oh, techie, I'm not into computers, not for me, sort of thing. But if you just take that little bit of time to peel back the onion a little bit, the more curious among us tend to get down there. And so, I think there's a bunch of differences between us, and sometimes they're contentious, like in the space. And as much as I love how we come together over our mutual appreciation for this thing, and also what seems to be an emerging phenomenon of how our individual perspectives on tangential subjects are changing as a result of being involved in Bitcoin. So, for example, maybe you've noticed changes in your political views. Maybe you've noticed kind of changes in, your perspective on individuality. Maybe your stance on guns has changed. Maybe your stance on, other things have changed.
Absolutely, absolutely, man. And I'm sorry for interrupting you, but this is like you're touching on my next question. You're basically touching it already, which is, do you feel like fiat has negatively affected the human psyche? Do you feel like it's changed the way that human beings see the world? Because I love the answer that you said earlier, which is, what do you say Bitcoiners have in common? You said hope, right? And you said that you graduated in 2008, 2009. This was coming out of one of the worst financial crises that we've ever had, right?
Mm-hmm.
So do you feel like the current financial system, which is based on fiat, do you feel like that has changed people, that in not only politically, but their beliefs, right, their financial goals? Do you think that it's changed them?
Far more than even the Bitcoiners appreciate. Yes. It's really hard. It's a hard thing to explore because there's nothing you can nail down. I mean, it's all kind of conjecture. But the more you engage with Bitcoin and the more you understand Bitcoin and money, and then the more you notice the changes that it inspires in yourself as an individual, then I think that equips you to be able to look out and see the relationship between money and other individuals. And I think it increasingly becomes clear that the process that you find yourself subject to as a result of being involved in Bitcoin, some of which I was just referring to, you see playing out like in a reverse manner in people who are subject to a fiat system, or maybe not a reverse manner, maybe the exact same sort of mechanism, but because of the nature of fiat in a negative way rather than a positive way. Like, the money that you use, that kind of object of everyone's desire that mediates, all the interaction and organization in a society. The nature of that thing is becoming more clear and clear that has a massive impact on people's behavior. And so when the nature of that thing is inherently flawed, as it is in the fiat system, or fiat money, then I think you get negative downstream effects in the behavior of people that are forced to use it. and forced to use it is a pretty critical component of that. Whereas when you have a market determined money whose nature is far more fair, and all different attributes that are positive, then I think you get downstream effects on behavior from that as well. So the one creates these downstream effects on behavior, and of course, before you have behavior, you have thought and feeling and sense and stuff like that. So you get these positive downstream effects from a good money like Bitcoin, and you could draw comparisons to the gold standard era as well. And I think you'd see milder versions of some of these behavior changes. And then you go to a fiat and you get downstream behavior change that's of a negative kind. And the worse fiat gets, i.e. as the more we degrade it and the more it devolves, the more you're going to see a commensurate devolution in behavior by those who are forced to use it. Whereas the more people engage with Bitcoin, the more Bitcoin evolves, you're going to see a commensurate improvement may be the wrong word, but a commensurate change in positive behaviors for the people that choose to engage in that one.
Absolutely. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of Bitcoiners are, especially in Bitcoin Twitter, perhaps I'm incorrect saying this, but I've been noticing, right, when it comes to like guns, when it comes to family, which you can call that conservatism, but I don't really call it conservatism. It's like you kind of see the same values in the Bitcoin community. Like you tend to see those. And I think that you're right. I think that Bitcoin is kind of like this light in the middle of, a plaza or a forum, whatever. And it's kind of just bringing all these people together and from different unique perspectives that they've lived.
Yeah, 100%. And I agree. Like, to put any label on it, like conservatism, is just a little too lazy or convenient, because it's more than that. Obviously, some of the attributes that exist in conservative thought today, some of these changes we're seeing from Bitcoin may fall into that, but I don't even want to put it in that kind of political spectrum, because it makes it so much more contentious. What I think is happening, and even using words like, it changes people's time preference, it's only just scratching the surface. There's far more to it than this. And I haven't really found a decent way to articulate it yet. But what's happening is, yes, people's time preference is being lowered in conjunction with having more faith and certainty in the future. So you automatically orient yourself and your planning and how you envision the future differently if you think the future is going to be good and there's going to be opportunity there and it's going to be bright, rather than the opposite. That will fundamentally change how you orient your behavior. And there's also this, whether it's a return to or an emergence of a extreme sense of personal responsibility and sovereignty. Many of us, I'll speak for myself, I abhor reliance on other people and other systems. And I detest when it's not even a reliance, but when it's a coerced or forced behavior that I'm forced to abide by. So I think, for the gun issue, is like, I think a lot of Bitcoiners just kind of, this self-sovereignty movement that may be inspired by taking self-sovereignty over your finances for the first time, and not only taking sovereignty over it, but being able to hold a financial asset that other people can't dilute and can't steal from you. I mean, that sense is bleeding into a bunch of other areas where you think it's not a stretch to imagine why people then think, well, man, I'm kind of relying on people outside of myself for my physical safety a lot too. I mean, if push came to shove, if a mob came to my house, if a burglar came in, like, am I ready to take responsibility for my own family's safety? And, a lot of people probably answer that question in the negative. They might say, no, I just thought the police would always take care of that, or the law, or whatever. But that's becoming an increasingly uncomfortable proposition. And people are more and more, I think, saying, I want to be in control. I want to be, because me being in control and me reducing my dependencies on other people and systems is freedom. And that's what this is all about. So if I got to own a automatic rifle in order to establish that, just so I can preserve my freedom, then yeah, I fucking want to do that. I want to be able to do that. You know, I'm not a bad person for wanting to do that. It's the way to defend against physical attacks in society today. If that's going to be the level of threat, then I should meet it with that level of defense. And so I think this way of thinking about sovereignty, reducing dependence, freedom was instigated with Bitcoin, and it's bleeding into so many different other elements of our thinking and our lives. And I think this is very consistent among Bitcoiners today.
Absolutely. And it's so interesting to see, John, is it's exactly what you said. It's you touched on it, which is the bleeding effects, right, of Bitcoinism, right, for lack of a better term. You know, before you have money in a bank, and even if that money gets stolen, you know, you can call up your bank and say, hey, that wasn't me, and the bank, you know, refunds you the money. You know, if it's a lot of money, you go through a process. But this idea of, these are my keys, I have total responsibility of my keys, but the benefit of that is this is really my Bitcoin, right? This isn't an IOU. My bank isn't going to go behind my back and lend it out to other people, right? This is really my fucking Bitcoin. And the psychology of it is so crazy, because that bleeds into, okay, I need a firearm because I need to protect my keys. I need to, you know, you touched upon this earlier on. I kind of want to get away from the city so that I have more independence, right? So it's the trickle down effects are just absolutely absurd.
Yeah, and
Really
how many Bitcoiners want to, you know, live in a rural environment, off the land, grow their own food, you know, kill their own meat, that kind of thing? Like, a lot, you know. And there's a reason for that, is because the city is a chaos. There's so, you know, there's so many threat models, there's so many unknowns, there's so many things that could happen, there's so much less space, there's so much less freedom. But you know, you know, having a citadel, whether it's by yourself or with another group of people of like mind, that's very appealing for those reasons.
Absolutely. So, John, as a podcaster, you tend to hear some pretty crazy stories, or at least I have, and especially from Bitcoiners from all walks of life. Is there anyone in particular that stands out that you have a fond memory of? You know, obviously, you know, you don't have to name the name. Just
Yeah,
you give a.
I'm terrible at this kind of stuff, because I don't tend to remember this kind of stuff well. Crazy stories.
Well, that's why I asked. Like, is there
Actually,
any that stand out that you just remember? You're like, you know what? There
there
is that
is.
one time.
There is. There is. And I hate to do this to you, but it's the only one that stands out, and I can't talk about it. I can't talk about it.
It's okay. Let's
But
move
it's
on.
with
Don't worry.
yeah, it's the story. It will be talked about, but
Okay, good
it's
to hear.
basically, it's a story of, or an account of, a Bitcoiner who, um, you know, was so, I know this will sound crazy to the non-hardcore among us, but was so deep down the rabbit hole and so enthralled and overtaken by the implications of what this thing is, that they, I want to be careful of my language here, but you know, they seem to have like some kind of a manic episode is not accurate enough, but that's probably how like a typical you know, psychologist or doctor would describe it. A prolonged episode of kind of of being away from their typical state of consciousness, just as a result of kind of contemplating Bitcoin, which is a far out notion. And I've only heard the full account of it once, but I've heard that that's happened to a couple people. And you know, what I would term that as, and this will sound really crazy to some people, but I would say that was a spontaneous mystical experience. There's a lot of literature on these things, and a lot of the, you know, as far as it was articulated to me, a lot of those things line up. And you know, this kind of gets on the conversation of, that's been popping up a little bit recently, is Bitcoin a religion? Is Bitcoin a cult? Is Bitcoin whatever? And usually no one's really broken into that deeply yet. Usually people just say, no, it's not a religion, it's just it's whatever. But
It totally is, though. It totally is. In some ways,
so
it totally is.
yeah, and it begs the question, what is a religion, and all that kind of stuff. But just to say that we're involved in something that is emoting these experiences in some people. These and like, these aren't crazy people. Like, these are very tuned, like very educated, very kind of even keeled, sensible people, and they're having these sort of spontaneous mystical experiences as a result of contemplating Bitcoin. And that's a weird one. If you were an anthropologist studying this thing, that's a very, very interesting thing. And to know that they come out of it and they're not crazy, they're back to the way they were, and they can articulate some of the things that they were thinking, seeing, feeling during that time, is really, really, really interesting. So I can't wait that I can actually the person that this happened with, we're going to talk about it on the podcast. But it's
I'm definitely looking forward to that. I'm definitely gonna keep an eye out for that podcast. I'm like, I found it. I'm gonna
I'll let you know.
So what I found really interesting about that, John, is that if it was just one person, right, it would be kind of like, okay, it's a CAG, whatever. It's a random occurrence. But the fact that, because I guess it hasn't happened to me in that deeper level, but I did have that type of eureka moment that just my head blew, and I was like, whoa. And you just get you feel like and you see, but you don't. But I wouldn't say that I've gone as far as the person that you're describing, but I've definitely had that type of eureka moment. And it's really interesting because multiple people have told me that, as well as what you said.
Well, I think one of the potential causes, and this will impact, many different things are wrapped up in this, your brain wiring, your temperament, all this kind of stuff. But Bitcoin, it's unavoidable that as a result of learning about and engaging with Bitcoin, a sense of clarity dawns on you, right? You do get those orange colored glasses to look out on the world on, and things become much more clear. You're like, oh, that's why that is that way. Oh, that's why that is that way. And like, what clarity means is that you're able to perceive truth, right? And truth is a fundamental concept. Truth is a how do I define truth? The truth is at the core of all of our of spirituality, of religions. It's always asking that question: what is truth? What is reality? What is the nature of whatever existence, consciousness, life, etc.? And clarity is the way you get there, right? Clarity is how you find answers. And when you encounter something that delivers to you a greater sense of clarity than you've ever experienced before, it's not that hard to imagine why that might snowball into seeing maybe more than you had anticipated seeing, or seeing more than you had wanted to see at a given moment, and being overwhelmed by the flooding of kind of insight and clarity that you might receive. Now, of course, I'm just speculating, but I can see how a process similar to that might elicit experiences like that.
Absolutely. 100% agree with you. And man, we could I feel like I could spend another hour asking you questions about that, but I completely agree. And before I get into kind of, the ending part of the podcast, which is price speculation, I usually say my favorite part of the podcast, but this podcast has been deep. So I've been quite entertained on these topics for sure. And I kind of want to ambush you a little bit on here, right? I've been trying to, but you're a podcaster yourself, so you're prepared.
Well, I'm also an open book, man, so I don't know if I could be ambushed, but go for it.
Okay. Well, I don't mean by ambush like gotcha. I mean like ambush like, okay, that's an interesting question. Let me take a step back and think about it type of ambush. Okay. So if you could go back 10 years and tell one thing to your younger self, what would it be? Obviously, you can't say buy Bitcoin, okay? Because that's a cheat. Other than that.
That's the obvious answer.
like a lesson. Like, it can't be like, listen, you know, the bet on the Heat or bet on the
Right,
Lakers to win the finals so I could win a bet or something. It can't be financial. It has to be a
10
deeper
years.
lesson. 10
So
years.
2010.
Yes, sir. Can't be Bitcoin. It can't be Bitcoin related, you know?
Damn, you got me. All right, give me a second here. Let me think about this.
What is something that you learned, right, that you wish that you could tell to your younger self? What is something so eye-opening that you're just like, wow, you know, whether like everything's gonna be okay, patience, you know, be any of those things.
I guess it would be, don't wait to, this is going to sound extremely corny, so give me a moment to explain myself. But like, basically, don't wait to attempt to find the thing that you feel like you want to do the most. You know, like, so, and I've always been I've always attempted to be my genuine self, right? Like, I never really put up with much like falseness with myself, you know, and if people liked it, great. And if they didn't, that's fine too. But I guess in my professional life, like, I always kind of, perhaps I made some assumptions about what I should do that were wrong. And they were probably guided by other, other thoughts or other motivations or ambitions than what I think is probably the right course. And which is, if there's something that you like doing and that it at all can be seen as productive, and that really sets you on fire, that like gives you energy rather than takes energy from you, like, that's probably the key. Let the compass of what your compass should be is, does it give or take energy from you? And that's probably a good indication that it's kind of genuinely something that you like and a genuine expression of who you are, and versus the opposite. And if you can do that, you're probably going to do it better than most, because a lot of people around the world today are doing shit they don't want to be doing, that doesn't reflect who they genuinely are, because they've been forced into it. They need to get by, they have obligations, all this kind of stuff. But if you can make that compass like amplifying yourself rather than quelling yourself, rather than suppressing yourself, then I think you're probably going to wind up happy. And just a simple example about that, and I guess part of the reason why I've continued doing the pod, but I thought about it like 10 minutes ago when we were talking, is I'll get off this call right now and I'll be jazzed up for like the rest of the night. You know, like I've had a bit of a long day. I was running around town doing a bunch of stuff. And, you know, I just got back from a run. I was kind of a little bit lethargic. I was a little bit tired. And now I'm jacked up. I'm going to have like a beer or two just to calm myself down and like to go to bed or something. And so, and I noticed that when I was first started podcasting in Shanghai, like, I'd have a, chaotic day. I was tired, and I'd get out of the chat and I'd be like, I feel great. There's a bounce in my step. And I kind of sense like, oh, like that's interesting. I didn't get that feeling or sensation doing many other quote unquote productive things in my life. And so I guess that would be it. Follow those things that give you energy and you'll probably be all right.
Absolutely. And I think that that's so true. And I just want to go kind of back up a little bit to the psychology of Bitcoin, which is, I'm going to ask the same question. Does Bitcoin give a little bit more to you, or does it take something more? Does it take more from you than does it give? Now I'm going to ask you the same question about fiat. Does fiat take more away from you than what it gives? Right. And I know my answer, right? Which is, Bitcoin has absolutely given me more than I've given it or taken. And you know what I mean, guys.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
But it's so the psychology of it can get so deep. But John, that was crazy. Thank you so much. I want to kind of end the podcast in the price speculation territory a little bit. So I'm just going to ask you to use your term. I'm going to ask you some rapid fire, rapid fire price speculation questions.
Okay. Not good at this stuff, but we can do it.
So do you believe in Plan B stock to flow?
You son of a bitch, going right for the jugular, huh? I don't know. I'm not equipped in any capacity to judge the merits of that model. Like, I'm not a statistician. I'm not a mathematician.
I always tell everybody, because they always give me this very convoluted answer: yes or no. Very straightforward. Yes or no, or I don't have enough information.
What's the question again?
So do you believe in Plan B stock to flow ratio?
Not enough information.
Not enough information. Fair enough. What is your target for the end of 2021? I'm going to tell you mine, so perhaps it's going to make you comfortable. My target's 100K, right? So what is your target for the end of 2021?
Yeah, that's the common one. I think it could be higher, to be honest with you. And like, I attempt to be conservative with this kind of stuff, but you never, with the macro landscape right now, it's such a, it's so unprecedented. You never know what could happen. Like, everything could fall off a cliff in the Q4 of this year. Trump wins, loses, the markets tank, we get inflation. Like, it's so convoluted at this point, you don't know. But end of 2021, I think we could be in the 1 to 300 range, without being too hyperbolic.
Let's go, man. Awesome. And I appreciate that answer so much more, because you come from fucking finance, so.
Well, I mean, that means nothing, right? We don't know. Nobody knows. First of all, none of those fuckers know how to value anything anyways, even if it's a traditional asset.
Oh,
but we don't know what the fuck it is that we're dancing around here, and nobody knows what it's going to do. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was like that. But again, if we finish 2021 at like 50K, first of all, I'm not disappointed by that at all. And I don't think that's bad. If Bitcoin decides to grow slowly and it doesn't grow in the kind of Plan B fashion, I'm okay with that. As much as I want its positive effects to impact the world positively as soon as possible, because everything is so fucked up, if it needs to happen slow, but that ensures that that gives it a better chance of actually happening, then I'm down with that. And by the way, what's your answer to the stock to flow question?
My answer is fuck yeah. And and my answer.
Then why are you saying 100K?
Dude, the same reason. Which is like, it's better to be conservative. It's better. What's the old saying? It's better to be surprised than being underappreciated, or something like that. It's better to be surprised than expect something, right? So if I put 100K target and then it hits 100K, or hits what you said, 50K, I'm just like, oh, okay. But if I'm like, it's going to hit 300K and it doesn't, that's a letdown. That's a major letdown. So I would say it's better to be conservative. But John, this is CryptoKreamers tradition, and we always end the podcast with this question. And the question is very easy. It's very simple, but we always get the most interesting answers, which is, what is your favorite ice cream flavor, man?
Vanilla.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
Sorry to disappoint.
No, dude, it's all good. We always get very interesting, and we get vanillas.
In fact,
no one has said chocolate ever, So
really, wow.
Yeah.
I had a vanilla milkshake today. I went to the mall. I'll show you. So you want to talk about low time preference, okay? These are my shorts.
Yeah, I can.
These are holes.
Right?
So I went to the mall. These are like 10 years old. I went to the mall to finally get a new pair of shorts. I haven't been in the mall in 5+ years. And it's not a place I like to be. It's just, it's not my environment.
That Fiat energy, bro.
Yeah. So for emotional support, I bought myself a vanilla milkshake from Laura Secord, this place that's been there for ages. And so I had some vanilla ice cream today.
Awesome, man. I like that. I like it. I'll accept that answer. Definitely. So dude, Thank you so much for coming on. Guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Crypto Creamers. Definitely. I'll definitely put John's podcast down in the link description. It's called Bitcoin Rapid Fire. Definitely like and subscribe. Definitely check out his podcast. And I'll put his Twitter down as well if you guys want to know more about John. And if you guys are expecting that story of that Bitcoiners, moment, right? Definitely, if I have that at the moment of when I publish this, I'll definitely put that down as well. John, thank you so much for coming on. And guys, don't forget to like and subscribe and tune into the next one. See you guys later.